En el siguiente panel, moderado por la jefa de Estadística y directora de la Dirección de Estadística de la Organización para la Cooperación y el Desarrollo Económicos, Martín Durán, escucharemos las ponencias de los expertos Giorgio Alleva, presidente del Instituto de Estadística de Italia, Pieter Everaers, director de Cooperación Internacional en Eurostat, y Bruno Tissot, jefe de Estadística y Soporte de Investigación del Departamento Monetario y Económico del Banco de Pagos Internacionales, sobre el ejercicio de buenas prácticas estadísticas y la renovación de los marcos institucionales que permitan adaptar la estadística a las necesidades de los usuarios.
Okay, I think it's my turn. So I'm very pleased to welcome you back this afternoon for the first session that we will have in the program. I hope you all had a very pleasant lunch and a break. So the first panel this afternoon is going to talk about renewed institutional frameworks and adoption of good statistical practice. I think it fits very nicely after the first our discussion this morning, where we discussed really in terms of the big principles and how we can operationalize those principles, but at some quite high level. So now we are going to hear in more details what does it mean in practice, and we're going to go deeper into these issues, both to hear from a national perspective, from a supranational or regional perspective, Eurostat, and then from a specific domain of statistics from financial statistics. So I think we have a very good panel for us to, again, look a little bit deeper into the issues that were discussed this morning. So with us we have, as was mentioned, I'm going to take them in order, Pieter Everaers, the Director of International Cooperation at Eurostat, who is an old friend. He's been in Eurostat for a long time, and he knows, of course, very well how he will discuss how the implementation of some of the principles that we discussed this morning are encouraged, and more than encouraged actually, are implemented at a regional level with the member states of the European Union. So I'm going to start by giving the floor to Pieter immediately, without further ado, because I'd like each of the the speakers to speak for about 15 minutes or so that at the end we have a little bit of time for questions. We didn't have any questions this morning, but I think it will be interesting to hear some reflections or perhaps some comments from the floor, and so I'd like to have a bit of time at the end of each of the 15 minutes presentation so that you can ask questions to our panelists if you so wish. So Pieter, I'm giving the floor to you. Oh, and that's your microphone. Sorry, I've stolen your microphone.
Thank you very much, Martina. Thanks very much to INDEC for inviting me to participate in this panel. Of course, congratulations also to INDEC for its 50 years. I also would like to thank the first panel from this morning, because I think they gave a very good and very detailed overview of the issues about code of practice, good principles, etc., which I will use to build further on. So I think it was really a good setup to have these introductions first. Just a few words about Eurostat. Eurostat is the statistical office of the European Union. The European Union are 28 member states. There are 4 affiliated countries, which we call Switzerland, Iceland, Liechtenstein and Norway, and there are 6 candidate countries, so in total about 38 countries. If you look to the 32 countries, they represent around 500 million people. The costs of the European statistical system are yearly about 3 billion euros. This means that for the very small costs of €6 per citizen, we are making European statistics. And European statistics is a brand which is used for policy making. As you know, the European Union is a group of countries where far-going regulations and far-going treaties have been made between the countries. And the main infrastructure of the European Union are statistics. Statistics are used for calculating the contributions of member states to the European Union, Statistics are also used to calculate all kind of support budget that will go in specific programs to the member states. So this means an important infrastructure for €6 per person. The European statistical system is a rather complex one. It was, in fact, the European Union was developed somewhere in the 50s, and over the last 70 years there has been a huge development in the way the European Union member states are working together, but also a huge development in statistics. And currently we can say that this statistical system that we have built up with about 50,000 statisticians. So if you add up the official statisticians in the 32 countries, this is about 50,000 people. If you look to the system that we have, we see at the moment some threats. And if I quickly go through these threats, you will recognize them, you will have heard them about. The first one, the paradox of indicators used for policy making. As I said, much of our statistics are used for policy making, which means that if you have an important indicator, that's the paradox, there are also a lot of incentives to try to influence it. And in this context, I want to mention now already that in 2009, 2010, we had the so-called Greek crisis on trust in European statistics. It appeared that in Greece, the government was holding the hands of the chief statistician of the Greek Statistical Office and was helping him in making the debt figures. Of course, this is unacceptable. And it caused, as you know, a big crisis in Europe. Of course, there's the issue of trust, fake news, and I politely have described it as an other understanding of society. There are many new types of data sources, and those data sources ask for different access rules, different procedures. We have competition with new information providers, the Googles, the Bloombergs, etc. We have new types of users. Just to tell you that we just found out that the average time a younger person spends on looking to our website is 8 seconds. In this 8 seconds, she or he decides to go to another site. So if you really want to grasp him, you have to use that 8 seconds. We also see, that's quite interesting, a reduction of our downloads. People are no more interested in big data bulks, but they're interested in very quick, already more or less ready data. Transparent society, we have a huge issue on confidentiality, and of course we see declining budget and increasing costs. In short, this means how to adapt to changing circumstances without giving in on quality. And I will focus on the legal environment, the legal challenges, but there are of course also other points on methodology, etc., but I will focus on the legal issues. And of course, quality, as we heard this morning, finds its backbone in the legal environment. If you have defined, as this morning was also said by the remark, if you have well defined your legal environment, then it takes away already a lot of risks on your quality. And of course, your quality is the main thing with which you can compete to other providers of statistics. Of course, challenges and threats, they create opportunities. And the most important opportunity I want to talk about is the more sound, modernized institutional framework. Make more efficient use of data sources, capture all relevant groups are other issues which are linked to. About our institutional and legal framework. It consists, in fact, out of more or less 6 layers. The first layer is Article 338 in the Treaty on the European Union. This is the basic treaty which says why the member states are working together. Then we have Regulation 223 on European statistics. This is the basic law of European statistics. And you have to know that European law supersedes national law. You can still have a national law on statistics, but the European law supersedes it. Then we have set up in 2008 an ESGAB, which is a European Statistics Governance Advisory Board, and an ESAC, which is more a board on advising on the direction of the statistics. We have a huge amount of sectoral legislation, about 300 laws which define what the member states need to do in all kinds of sectors of statistics. Then we had the European Commission decision on Eurostat from 1997, the old one. Then we have the Code of Practice, and you have heard already quite a lot about this Code of Practice this morning, which is a follow-up of the fundamental principles, which fits on the quality framework from IMF, and which is also taken over by other organizations in the context, for example, of OECD. So let's start with the treaty, because we were challenged to change things. So what did we change in the treaty? Nothing. This is the treaty, but it's important to read in this treaty that the system that makes statistics in Europe consists of two pillars. The first pillar is the European statistical system, which I'm representing. The second system is the system which is based on the European system of central banks. And those central banks are, for part of the countries, responsible for the euro, for the Eurozone, the monitoring on the euro. And we recognized a couple of years ago that the cooperation between those pillars was not good. And we said we need to construct a bridge between the ESS and the ESCB. So what we did, we added the European Statistical Forum. This meets once a year. The Director Generals of the Statistical Institutes, the Director General of the Statistical Parts of the banks, they are all represented, and they talk about the common part of our statistics, which, by the way, is mainly balance of payments related statistics. In 2016, we also developed a Memorandum of Understanding on a specific group of statistics, macroeconomic imbalance statistics, which are quite important for the macroeconomic policy in Eurostat, in the European Union. So this is the first step where we said we need to at least bridge the coordination between the two most important pillars of European statistics. The second layer is this basic law, Regulation 223 on European statistics, where we changed a few things in the period 2012 to 2015 when it was amended. So the amended law 759 from 2015. And there's commitment on confidence, I will come back to that, professional independence, the coordination rule, the access to administrative sources, and also the relation to other providers. Just to give you an idea about the other providers, we have 32 countries, but we have about 350 institutes which are officially recognized as providing data for the European statistical system. In the Netherlands, very centralized, it's only the CBS. But for example, in France, in INSEE, a very decentralized system, it's about 17 organizations. So in total, we have about 300, 350 organizations which are member of the European statistical system. Let's go to this commitment on confidence, because that is important to tell you. If I explain quality to people, to you, I use normally these circles. And these are at least defense circles around the issue of quality. The inner circle is what we could call mathematical quality. The second is methodological quality, sample frames, etc., etc. The third is conceptual quality, how do you measure it, how do you measure poverty, you have several approaches. But then the fourth and the fifth are the important ones. Institutional quality is represented by our code of practice and by our regulation 223. But we said this is not enough, because the code of practice is only valid for those institutes who have submitted to it. And then we said we need to have a commitment of the governance of the countries to them to guarantee that they will follow up on the institutional quality. And this is what we call the commitment on confidence. A political recognition of the importance of the code of practice for maintaining public confidence. This means that every country, the government of the country, has to state that it guarantees that the national statistical system can work online with the code of practice. Member states must implement it, they're all working on the implementation, and by the 9th of June this year, we will have to report to the Council and the Parliament on how well it's implemented. The second issue is on the coordinating role of national statistical institutes and their heads. So what are they coordinating? Of course, there needs to be a kind of work program, annual work program on statistics in the country. And that is in fact what they coordinate. Statistics means European statistics in the country. The other issue about representing and the national guidelines for ensuring quality, I think they speak for themselves. There's also the list of statistical products. So what we have done, we have a list of all European statistics. And for each of those statistics, we can see who in the member state is making that statistics or is providing the information to Eurostat. And of course, this gives a very good and transparent view on how the system is structured. Access to administrative records. We strengthened in the new regulation the access. We also included the possibility for the National Statistical Institute to influence the design of the administrative records. So also the right to be involved in case of discontinuation. So the administrative sources are becoming very important for our statistics, so we should have a say. And of course the implementation of this goes via memorandum of understanding with all kinds of institutions in the member states. We also updated the decision on Eurostat, and the decision on Eurostat also functions as the commitment on confidence from the European Commission to guarantee that Eurostat can work along the commitment on, or work along the code of practice. And it describes the responsibility and independence of the chief statistician, the access to administrative data and other director generals of the European Commission, and it describes also, and that's quite important, quality guidelines for those statistics that are made by other directorate generals in the European Commission. We are making official European statistics, other DGs might still make other statistics which are not European, but we advise them about the quality guidelines. Then we are redefining our sectoral legislation. As I said, we had about 300 to 350 regulations, but we are now organizing them in a more flexible way. In the bottom you can see that we are making 3 framework regulations under which there will be more specific regulations about specific details and more on the how. The what will be in those integrated framework statistics defined. Finally, we update the code of practice, where our 10 commandments, as they were mentioned this morning, where we included a quality declaration of the European statistical system, a very high-level statement by the Director Generals. We added the principle on coordination and cooperation. On the access of data, we made clear that we are working with multiple data sources, and we want to have access also to privately held data. Quality not only concerns the data in itself, but also the integrated data, the results from those multiple sources. And of course, we describe the access of big data and the cooperation with public-private partnerships. We also have explicitly made now the data protection and security. We emphasize the independent deciding on the time and content of releases, something already emphasized also this morning. The methodology relates to registers and frames, not only to data sets. Metadata need to be managed throughout the process. Data sharing and integration is promoted, open data approach. And the dissemination uses platforms and open data standards. So these are new things that we added to the code of practice. And they are significant changes. And you might know that we have a system of peer reviews from which we every 4 or 5 years review the member states on their compliance with this code of practice. It's not a blame and shame activity, but it's an activity to make clear where improvement actions can take place. Finally, jump to the issue which I mentioned in the beginning, capturing all relevant user groups. We are seeing a quick disappearance of traditional publication modes. We have still maybe 5 or 6 books, but the rest is all digital. And we have our website, and the website we have seen that is quickly changing in its structure because of the young users who are only using maximum 8 seconds to a website before they move to something else. We also use all kinds of new media, innovative techniques in the design, dynamic tables, dynamic movies, videos which you can stop and go into the data, etc. But an important issue is the new governance on dissemination. We create, like in some of the member states, a group of people, doubling more or less our dissemination unit, with people who, before they decide on disseminating things, have a whole morning about brainstorming. And this led in 2017 that our press releases went from 200 to 540. So we had 540 releases of data, facts, information to the public. The year before it was still only 200. And this is clearly the way you need to disseminate your information in a new era. 4 main messages finally. The first message, I think that the fundamental principles, like what we did with our code of practice, they need to be updated. A new commitment is needed, and I think the whereas, as it has been developed on the commitment more or less 2 to 3 years ago, is not sufficient. We have to go further. It also has to include issues of data access, etc. The data of the statistical law has to be kept up to date, clear. We have to be more agile, more proactive and user-oriented. And I think we have to rebalance data sources and confidentiality issues over the next years. I hope to be provocative, and I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. I think you will have had a sense of what a very, very elaborate system of statistics at a regional level can be. But it's more than a regional level, because the EU is a political undertaking, and so there's a lot of regulations which, as Peter mentioned, supersedes the national law. And it's very important to have all this governance mechanism between Eurostat and the countries. And so I think it's a really good example of coordination in practice, a very strong coordination, because it's empowered by the law. It's also a good example, I think, and you've ended with this, Peter, which I think was very interesting to say that the law, and that I think it's a good reflection also on what Stefan said this morning, is that the law should not be seen as a straitjacket. It has to be revisited to reflect evolving realities. It has to be amended once in a while. Not all the provisions in the law, but the provisions that need to be updated, and in particular to reflect new problems or new issues, such as the emergence of new data producers, big data, but also I think something we have not mentioned a lot since this morning, but the increasing importance, as being seen by users in particular, of open data. You make your data open, so that, we heard the President this morning talking about being transparent. Being transparent requires that people have access to your data, and your data are open to the public. So I think this issue of open data, I think we'll hear more in the future, and probably a number of statistical laws will have to be updated to reflect this new development. So thank you very much, Peter, for this overview. I'm now going to give the floor to Giorgio Alleva. Giorgio is the president of ISTAT, Italy, and is also a full professor at University of Sapienza at the University of Rome. So, Giorgio, please.
Thank you, Martin. Ladies and gentlemen, let me first felicitate INDEC for their 50th anniversary. 50 years is a true milestone, and celebrating 50 years of activity is a splendid opportunity for assessing and appreciating the long way you have gone, your attainments, your most significant changes. Congratulations. I'm very glad to be here in Argentina today. History makes our two countries very close and tied by profound cultural and economic relationship. And I have a special and personal affection for Argentina, where I spent many time for teaching statistics here in Buenos Aires. The Italian community in Buenos Aires counts about 300,000 of members, more than the entire population in Venice, and there are about 900,000 Italians who live in Argentina, and about 50% of the Argentinians have Italian origins of some sorts. And history makes us very close. That individual, family, and collective story has often been represented also on the big screen. And I think to our ancestors who were migrants full of hope. And Argentina, to me, is a beautiful lesson and a constant reminder that openness, acceptance, integration are possible. Let now introduce my presentation. Yes, I will briefly introduce the legal framework of ISTAT, which consists of a domestic framework and then a European one. ISTAT is a public research institution. It was founded in Italy in 1926. It's the main producer of official statistics as a public service to citizens and policymakers. Since 1861, year of the unification of Italy, the statistical functions were carried out by a statistical division of the Ministry of Agriculture. The law assigned the Central Statistical Office the task of coordinating all the activities of collecting and disseminating data of interest to the state. The first director was Corrado Gini, certainly the most famous Italian statistician. Today, ISTAT is a legal public entity that operates in full autonomy thanks to the National Statistical Law issued in 1989. We are around 2,300 people. The provisions of the 1989 law were very advanced in terms of guarantees of independence in scientific, organizational, financial, and accounting matters. As we all know, a crucial point of the independence is the appointment of the head of National Statistical Institute. The head of the institute is appointed by presidential decree on the proposal by the Prime Minister and resolution by the Council of Ministers with a fixed term of mandate. The appointment is subject to the binding opinion, 2/3 of members, expressed by the relevant parliamentary commissions, who may require a hearing of the designated person. The president is selected among university professors in statistics, economics, and related subjects with international experience. During the last procedure of appointment, an open call for proposal was launched, which led to a short list of candidates, from which the nominee was selected, subject to the binding opinion of the parliamentary commissions and to a parliamentary hearing prior to appointment. The President is the only responsible for decision regarding processes, methods, standards, and statistical procedures, as well as the content and calendar of statistical releases and publications for European and national statistics developed, produced, and disseminated by ISTAT. Of course, she cannot bear such a responsibility alone. Independence means high-quality human capital and commitment to quality of researchers and personnel as a whole. The 1989 law also established the National Statistical System, statistical offices in each administration of the state, regions, and territorial bodies, assigning to ISTAT the pivotal role in the system. ISTAT is responsible for the planning of system's activities within the framework of the National Statistical Program, with the task of guiding and coordinating the structure, providing technical training assistance, ensuring coherence and quality of data produced, and the protection of professional statistical secrecy. In 2010, the presidential decree reorganized ISTAT, consolidating its key role as a regulator in collecting and managing national and European statistical information. In addition, ISTAT is made the European Union's single interlocutor in the field of statistics according to the European Statistical Law. In 2014, we started working on our modernization program, launched and implemented in 2016, which will lead from a stovepipe model towards an integrated production system based on centralized data collection and common infrastructures and services. The Statistical Law of 1989, as I mentioned before, is the legal cornerstone of Italian official statistics. It lays down the main rules on the national statistical system and on the National Institute of Statistics. The National Statistical System is a network of actors which contribute to the official statistic as producers or providers. It consists of ISTAT, various central and branch statistical offices of government departments, the statistical offices of regions, provinces, and municipalities, other public statistics information bodies, and also some private ones. System members share the common goal of supplying the country and international bodies with official statistical information, ensure uniform policy, homogeneous organization and rational information flows at central and local levels, according to the law. The COMSTAT, the Policy Making and Coordinating Committee for Statistical Information, is the governing board of the national statistical system. ISTAT is entrusted to rule the system through the COMSTAT, chaired by the ISTAT president. COMSTAT also decides on the National Statistical Program, which is the 3-year planning for the system. And the drafting process is carried out through a wide consultation which takes place within working groups called quality circles. Quality circles have to analyze the demand and assess whether and how the supply of statistical information can be improved. The Commission of Users of Statistical Information, which includes, the name in the slider is QUIS, which includes representatives from 37 institutions, constitutional bodies, scientific organizations, regions and municipalities, the business community, civic and voluntary organizations, and media. They asked to suggest priorities to be taken into account in the National Statistical Program, assisting ISTAT in the identification of the demand for statistical information. The COGIS, the Commission for the Quality of Statistical Information, established by the 1989 Statistical Law, is an independent collegial body called to supervise on the impartiality, completeness, and quality of the statistical information produced by the national statistical system, and on the compliance with the regulations and recommendations of international community bodies. ISTAT is an active member of several international statistical bodies, in particular in the European statistical system, and membership in the European statistical system represents a value for us and has a direct impact on our legal framework and institutional setting. The law provides rules so to guarantee independence, integrity, and accessibility, accountability of statistical authorities, and regulates the cooperation with Eurostat and within the ESS to produce European statistics, ensuring the efficient functioning of the system in the provision of high-quality statistics. ISTAT is the main producer of European statistics in Italy and the national coordinator for European statistics according to European statistical law. In 2014, the law has been revised, and Italy strongly advocated for this revision, which was finally approved during the Italian presidency of the Italian semester. And already Pieter pointed out the new modernization of the law. The European Statistical Code of Practice, which is the soft law, is the cornerstone of the common quality framework of the European statistical system and covers, it was underlined, institutional environment, statistical processes, and statistical outputs. And the recent revision of the Code of Practice reflects the latest changes and innovations, such as the emerging new data sources, uses of new technologies, modernization of the legal framework, and the result of the second round of peer reviews on the implementation of Code of Practice carried out from 2013 to 2015 in all EU and EFTA countries. The peer review in Italy was conducted in June 2015 by a team of international experts. Overall, ISTAT has been considered highly compliant with the Code of Practice on the basis of recommendations provided 21 improvement actions in the period 2016-2018 were identified to further enhance institutional framework, cost effectiveness, human resources policy, and continuing efforts to serve the needs of users. At the end of 2017, the most part of the improvement action were completed. These recent changes has been implemented in the new ISTAT bylaws, adopted according to the provision of a national law approved in 2016 that lists ISTAT among the public research bodies. ISTAT has the autonomy to adopt internal general organization acts dealing with more specific issues related to its organizational structure and functioning. And ISTAT bylaws emphasize a renewed role for research, thanks also to the plan for methodological thematic research included in the 3-year strategic plan, testifying the independence of our research and its relevance for the users. And ISTAT set up a set of infrastructure for managed research proposals and activities so to optimize their pertinence. The 3-year plans to the advisory boards and scientific committees, laboratory for innovation and environment for the agenda for sustainable development and its monitoring, as stated in the Cape Town Global Action Plan. And ISTAT then carried on in the last months various activities approaching these issues. First of all, we conducted an in-depth revision of the list of other national authorities producing also European statistics. And we have developed guidelines on data quality for the national statistical system and tools to conduct audits on the statistical processes of European statistics produced by the owners. Compliance with the European Code of Practice implies not only continued efforts by the NSIs, but needs also a strong commitment by the national governments, and the commitment and confidence go in this direction. And in Italy, the commitment and confidence was recently introduced in the presidential decree that approves the Italian National Statistical Program. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is our story, our experience, and I am honored to have been called to share it in such a happy and solemn occasion. With so many things in common our countries and our institutes have, I do hope that this experience can add to our international cooperation and make it wider and stronger. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giorgio. I'm sure that what you, your experience and the way you presented it, there were many things that can be a source of inspiration for INDEC as they are re-establishing their system. And in particular, I think they can look in great detail into the organization of your governance arrangements, among other things. I'm saying that in the light of the last remarks that were made by Jorge after our panel this morning, and in particular the articulation between your regional branches and the ISTAT, which make the, if I understood correctly, the ISTAT system, and where the head of the national president of ISTAT, you are also the president or the head of ISTAT. So I think that's an interesting example, that an interesting experience that can be of use and useful to INDEC, I'm sure. But there were also many other things in your presentation that can be a source of inspiration as well. I'm now giving the floor to Bruno Tissot from the BIS. Is the Director of Statistics at the BIS, and is going to present the case of renewed, or how we implement some of the principles that we discussed this morning in a particular context, which is a sectoral approach of financial statistics. So Bruno, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias por la invitación. That's all what I can do. But happy birthday to INDEC. The BIS, rapidly, is a forum of central banks, and the goal is to promote financial stability and monetary stability. We have 60 full institutional members, and we have committees. One is very well known, the Basel Committee on Banking Regulation, the Basel Rules. We have also a committee on statistics, and we have 90 members. And of course, Argentina is a very important member of the BIS. Yes, today I would like to discuss a little bit data sharing, because it's really on the top of the agenda, I would say, of many international organizations. This was abundantly said today, especially by the IMF and again by Eurostat. But for the BIS, it's really the core of our business model. We promote cooperation, so sharing data is really the core of our business model. So I will have a few points today. I will start with the fact that external data sharing is relatively limited. Then I will go into the details. What do we mean? Why is it important? How can we proceed? And I will try to convince you that yes, it's possible. We can do some interesting things, and I will provide some examples on what we are doing in Basel. So why is it limited? So we had a survey among central banks all over the world, and I just have one slide here showing that external data sharing, so sharing of data, some kind of data for a specific domain, not for all domains, with at least one external institution and the central bank, it's only 40% of the cases. So it's relatively limited. So it means that only for half of the central banks, there is at least one exchange of data with an external counterpart. And as you can see, I like it in red, it's mainly with supervisory authorities when they are outside of the central banks, but also with statistical offices, especially on monetary and financial statistics. And then with other groups, then you have much less data sharing. So the point is that there is not a lot of external data sharing. What do we mean by data sharing? In fact, there are different visions of what is data sharing. There is first the view that we should share more data that is in fact non-confidential but not available. Data is a public good, but it's not made sufficiently available. We should share it more. We should disseminate more. Then there is another issue, which is we don't share data because we think it's confidential data, but in fact, it's not always the true, and we could have more sharing of data that we think are confidential, but we could revisit this, or we could simply change our assessment. And this would be the broad sharing of data. And then you have the third area where it's really confidential data. You cannot share this to everybody, but obviously there are more and more people interested in sharing this data, and this is what I would call narrow data sharing. What do we mean by data sharing? Is also depending on with what type of users. And first, what is very important is to share information within institutions. This is a big problem, and central banks that in the survey showed that internal data sharing was the first issue for central banks, before external data sharing. Of course, then you have data sharing across institutions in the same countries, especially between the central bank and the national statistical offices, which is very important. Then you have sharing of data between countries, for example, you could imagine on balance of payment statistics. And then you have globally, and for the BIS it's very important, sharing of information with other countries and with other international organizations. And lastly, what is also coming very important is the sharing of information to specific groups like academic researchers or even the society, the civil society. And the last item on how to identify what we mean by data sharing is what is the kind of information we have in mind. So we have, with all other international organizations, worked on this terminology in the context of the G20, and it's very important to distinguish three types of data. One is aggregated data. So normally, you cannot identify easily individual units, but it's not always the case. You can sometimes identify individual units, so you have to be, it's not because it's aggregated that it's not confidential. And this is particularly a problem because now you can access to third-party information that can give you an idea of who is reporting the data. For example, you can Google the balance sheet of a company, and then if you have another data set that is anonymized, then you can make the link. Then you have the disaggregated data, where it's not very micro data, but still you can identify individual units with this disaggregated data. And then you have micro data, where here you have information on specific transactions, instruments, and firms. And here, almost all the time, information is confidential, but not always. Sometimes you have granular information that is publicly available, especially because you have the public financial statements of firms. And last point is, for what do we need to have to share this information? And I would rely on what we are doing at the BIS. First step is sometimes we really need to share information that is fully granular and fully non-anonymized. So you really need to share information on a specific bank and with a specific name across different bodies. The second point is sometimes you need to share granular data, but it can be anonymized because you are interested in the granular information, but not the name of the institutions that are involved. Third point is that you want to share aggregated data that is not to microdata, but nevertheless is restricted because of these confidentiality requirements, the very well-known rules that you should not have, you should have at least 3 reporters for a specific data statistics. Another point is that sometimes we just need to share qualitative information. We don't want to share quantitative information. And this is very important, for example, when you want to identify a global firm. You want to identify who are the firms belonging to the group, and this information is qualitative, and sometimes this information is confidential, even though it's not quantitative. And lastly, I was saying before, you want to share non-confidential data that is not sufficiently made available to the public. Let me now turn to why is it important. First, we have the new information needs after the crisis. Because of the specificity of the crisis, we need to have more institution-level information or even transaction-level information, and we need to have more an idea of the distribution of global aggregates. So we need to go beyond the aggregates, we need to go micro. And by definition, if you want to go micro, you need to share information that is more sensitive. Second point is that the crisis was global. You had interconnections between markets and countries. So, for example, someone supervising a bank would be interested to have information on the insurance, but he doesn't have access to the information. Or someone supervising a bank in a country A would be interested to have information on these banks in country B, but he has to share the information. And the third point is that the crisis has shown that we rely on national, residency-based national systems of statistics, and we need also to have global statistics. For example, we need to have information on the global firms, on the global banks. And for this, you need to reconstruct information on global firms, drawing on national information, but you need to consolidate this information. You need to have consolidation, and for this, you need to go very granular, because you need to add all the affiliates of one country added to the affiliates of another country in order to have an assessment of a global firm. And for this, you need to share information. Another point that is important is not only you need this information after the crisis because of the new policy needs, but also we need to make a better use of the data that are available. We want to make data available to a wider range of users. We also want to limit the reporting burden. It's easy to say, but the fact is after the crisis we have increased the reporting burden to a lot of institutions, so at least we should limit this, and data sharing can help. We realized that sometimes we should simply take use of the administrative data sets that already exist but are not accessed to. So we need to share this data and take advantage of what is already existing with these very various administrative data sets. And sometimes we need to mobilize new private sector data sets, like, of course, the internet-based data set is a good example. It was mentioned before. And as I said, it's really something that is, I speak under the control of all the colleagues here, recognized by the global community in the Data Gaps Initiative, in the second phase, we have a specific recommendation on data sharing, which is exactly to promote the exchange of data and metadata in order to improve the quality of data and to improve the availability for policy use. And not only the recommendation is on data sharing, it is also on revisiting confidentiality constraints. What is behind is that we should also make more data non-confidential when we think they are confidential. And at the BIS, for example, we are taking these steps. A significant number of data sets that used to be confidential, considered by us as confidential, with new techniques, we have made them non-confidential. How to improve data sharing? I will rely rapidly on this data gaps initiative. So there was extensive work with all the international organizations, and there is a general direction with a few principles. First, we should have common identifiers. Second, we should exchange on experiences. Third, we should balance the confidentiality needs, but also the user's needs. This was highlighted by the IMF this morning. The user's needs is becoming very important. We should also link various data sets. We should try to enhance the provision of data at the international level so as to share among all of us. We should also try to find ways, in a concrete ways to share granular data, and there are techniques, confidentiality techniques that we can promote, and we should aim for collecting data only once. This is easy to say, but so this is a general direction, and then for specific entities, then you can have specific recommendations. In the case of, I will go rapidly on this, but in the case of central banks and financial supervisors, we have made a follow-up report where we have some kind of recommendations on what we should do between central banks and financial supervisors to improve data sharing, and we should communicate more, we should have a clear legal basis, we should have more cooperation at the working level, we should have joint or common standards, we should have sound measures to protect confidential information so that people are reassured. And we should also formalize sometimes arrangements that are, at least for central banks and the financial supervisors, not completely formalized. It would be better to formalize them as a principle. Let me now finish rapidly with my trying to convince you that yes, data sharing is possible, and I will present a few examples from Basel rapidly. One is our well-known BIS International Banking Statistics. Basically, we provide information on each banking system, the banking system of France, of Germany, etc., at a global level, and we provide this information, but not at the level of individual banks. But this information can be confidential and can be shared only among the reporting central banks and supervisory authorities. It can be done confidential, and then it's published. But a large part of the data that we collect is in fact confidential and is not accessible to the public, but is made available to the central banks in the world. So when Singapore or I don't know, Hong Kong is reporting to the BIS, by definition they can access to the data reported by Brazil to the BIS, even if it's confidential. The second data collection that we have is something that has expanded a lot after the crisis, is what we call quantitative impact studies. The point is that when we do financial regulation, and we have increased a lot financial regulation policies after the crisis, more and more you want to assess the impact of the new policy on at a very granular level. Basically what we do is that when we have new proposals for banking regulation, we check the impact of these proposals on a sample of, for example, 250 banks, the most important in the world, and we do this impact assessment, quantitative impact studies, at a very granular level. For this, in general, the information is highly confidential, but is anonymized. You don't need to have the name of the banks, because you only want to have the assessment of the impact of policy on these banks in order to change, to measure the evolution of the implementation of the policy, and also to change the policy if need be. So this is very important. And the last item that I had is what we call GSIB, so Global Systemic Banks, we have information that is non-anonymized, that is collected at the level of the largest banks in the world, and this information is collected by an international data hub, so all the countries are sending this granular information, all the countries participating have direct access on this granular information, so of the other countries that are reporting the information, and also there is some access of this information at an aggregated level for international bodies. So, 3 examples, relatively aggregated but confidential data. This has been the BI statistics for many years. Quantitative impact studies, very granular information but anonymized, and this is becoming very important after the crisis because of the new policy to enhance the financial system. And also the last development is putting together information that is highly confidential on very specific institutions and that is shared among countries. Conclusions from all these examples. First, it's very important to clarify what are the confidentiality requirements. Second, what are the practical arrangements, IT system, security system, etc. Making use of the data, it's not just collecting the data, you have to make use of the data. This is very key. The arrangements are data dependent. It depends on what type of information, highly confidential or not, you are dealing with. And also, it's a trust building exercise. So banking statistics at BIS, 40 years of experience of people being able to exchange information. The data hub has been set up for 10 years. So it's really, over time, you gain trust and people accept to share data. This is very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bruno. I think you provided an excellent example, a very concrete, I think, of an issue that we discussed this morning, a couple of issues that we discussed about confidentiality, about the access of data, making them fit for the users. But I think meet users' need, I should say rather, and fit for purpose, which is what we think that we highlighted this morning. But I think one point was very important. Also, providing the perspective of one of the actors in national statistical, you know the national statistical system, but you represent the central banks in national statistical systems, and so showing how a very important actor in the NSS can contribute, of course, and follows the principles and put in place, implement some of the principles that we discussed this morning using this very excellent example of data sharing. But what is really striking is indeed when the world is increasingly interconnected, economies depend on what's happening in other economies. It's not just an issue for the country itself, but it is an issue collectively of this data sharing that you said, because it's not, if you don't know what's happening, well, we all remember in another area, but very similar, but the transfer of one company, international property products from the US to Ireland because of tax purposes, lower tax rates on companies, made the GDP of Ireland grow by 26% in 1 year. So you can see how interconnected our economies are. So that's very important that we are able to analyze our, this morning the President said we need to know where we are. But where we are doesn't just depend on what individual countries can produce. It's also through the type of examples, the data sharing internationally, that we can understand this interconnectedness, and what happens in one country will have an influence on what happens in your own country. So I think that was very relevant and highlighting. So I know we already almost behind time, but if there are a couple of questions, of course I can't see you, so almost, but if we could pick up perhaps 2 questions from the audience. If you can identify, or raise your hand, identify yourself, and say to whom the question you are posing is addressed to. If not, we'll go to coffee immediately. So I give you another 1 minute, 10 seconds to raise your hands. If I can't see any hand risen after 10 seconds, we'll all go for coffee. So, since I can't see very well, any question in the audience? No? A script perhaps, because I can't see your hands? No. Okay, well, that being the case, I think we had 3 very good presentations, and so please join me in thanking the panelists for their presentation.